this sugya Abaisai, making an early Shabbos, is, I would say, maybe not for an Eretz Yisrael Dikarav to even talk about Bichlal. What do I mean? I mean that in Eretz Yisrael, many of the great Paiskim, when they discuss the Shaila of early Shabbos, they start out like the Lashon of the Chazain Ish, brought in the Stipler, the Kilas Yankiv, the Stipler's in, brought in a few places in the Orchis Rabbeinu. They asked him about a Shaila of a Tainus that was Chal on an Erev Shabbos, Mistama was a Sar B'Tevis, and they wanted to know, could they make an early Shabbos? Because it's difficult for the Bachrim to fast. And he said, B'kol oifin ein lahaktim. One should never make an early Shabbos, what we call the early Shabbos, says the Stipler, because already Kfar Nagu Lispalo Rak B'Tzeisik Echavim, the minig in Eretz Yisrael is to only daven after it says Eli Yispalo Bisman. They should be Mispal Bisman, and the kids that are underage, no, let them eat. Let them eat. The Stipler is brought in the Orchis Rabbeinu, like I mentioned, a moisid yeladim koshalem lotzim kamashois. It's difficult for them to fast. Could you make the Ma'ariv earlier? Omar more ein l'shanas mi minig. This is the minig. Shekvar nagu ayoim. Today we daven Ma'ariv at night, and they shouldn't make an early Shabbos. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in the Alicha Shleima in Tefillah Perik Yidalad or Yud Loy Haisa Das Rabbeinu Noicha. Rosh Shlomo Zalman was not happy about the fact Masha Hischel Lahanig that there are certain places Be'eretz Yisrael that started making early Shabbos. Mikol Makam Roila B'nei Torah L'Kabel Shabbos Bizman. He said Fakert B'nei Torah they should be Makabel Shabbos later on. He says, and the children knew. Everyone says, and what about the kids? How are they going to stay up for the meal? So what's the answer? It says Rosh Hashanah Zaman, let them take a nap in Erev Shabbos. Ein Zenocha, and he said to change. Rosh Hashanah Zaman didn't like this new minig. He said, this is why it's difficult for me. Rav Elyashiv in the Kovetz Tshuvas, in Kovetz Tshuvas Chelik Aleph, Siman Chav Gimel. This is a tshuva that was not like an ish mipifish. This is Mamish Rav Elyashiv writing. And Rav Elyashiv says, you should do all cold tatzdiki, do whatever you can not to make an early Shabbos. So I must tell you, it seems to be that the minig in Eretz Yisrael is to be misnagid l'chayra to making an early Shabbos. But however, Rabbi Yisai, we know that there's a long-standing minig in Chutz La'aretz of making early Shabbos. So why I was asked to speak about the topic, I don't know. I don't know. Why, I don't know. Here you have, I'm Eretz Yisrael Diki Yid, and over here, if people hear me, so I must tell you the secret. I'm in the privacy of my office right now, and nobody's here. I even told my kids today, go out. They don't want to hear this year. No. Don't want them to know because they'll put up signs against me in Eretz Yisrael. If they hear me giving a shir about early Shabbos, unless it's a shir against early Shabbos. But how could you give a shir against early Shabbos if that's the minig in the Gans Chutz La'aretz? So today what we'll do is we're going to try today to be masakim the 20-something issues that there are in making an early Shabbos. And let's see, Basoif, the Olam will decide, the Olam have their Chashvarabonim and Paiskim, that they'll decide. And I'll just tell you whatever the issues are, so that if you make early Shabbos this Friday night, you'll have a lot what to talk about. You'll have lots of shilas what to talk about. This is the Siman. The Siman is Reish Samach Zayin. Might as well try to be, it's only a 3-sif siman, it's a short siman. So I might as well just mention 2 nakudas from the beginning of the siman, which is not as related, but the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Reish Lamed Beis and Sivkot in Chof Tes, Mishnah Berurah discusses over there about Mincha on Erev Shabbos, because Sif Aleph in our siman discusses Mincha on Erev Shabbos in general, which is not so much our topic, but the Mishnah Berurah brings that even though normally when a person makes when a person has a decision of davening mincha, when a person in general has a decision about davening mincha, should he make a mincha closer to this man after mincha ktana, or should he daven mincha gdoila? So the halacha is lichatchila, a person's supposed to really daven mincha ktana. The Shulchan Aruch says in the yeshivas they daven mincha gdoila because of the seder Ha'Yom, etc. But the very interesting, the Mishnah Berurah brings a Chayei. This Chayei is in Hilchos Shabbos in Klal Aleph, in the first Klal in Sif Yud Aleph over there. The Chayei says that on Fridays, you should daven mincha gdoila. Even though during the week it might be better to not. He said that's midinei kovid Shabbos, because there's so much going on and so busy and so this and thus. So, you see that fellow is running into the mincha. The greatest kovid Shabbos is that the person should daven mincha beforehand. He says mincha gdoila. Look, halavai I'll be zoichet. Some of the things I'm saying today, I'm unable because of my schedule but at least maybe I could be ma'or the tzibur. So that's one interesting idea, Rabbi Yisai. Another interesting idea is at the end of the siman, in Sif Gimel, which again is not related to us, but we say, "Hapoyrei sukkah shalom aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael." And the Farshim explain over here, because it's Shabbos and Shomer Amo Yisrael Lo Ad and Halavai. Today you need a little bit of an extra Shmira, especially in Chutz La'aretz and after Shmira. So Halavai, don't worry, on Shabbos, it's Ufrois Aleinu Sukash Leimecha. And as a matter of fact, the Yisayv Sharish Avodah, and this is brought really in the Shara Tshuva, they bring down that when you say Ufrois Aleinu, that's when you stand. Why do you stand dafka over there? Some people standing at the end, Ashkiveinu, the middle. The Shara Tshuva brings down from the Arizal. And Ben Ish Chai brings this, you're supposed to stand at Ufrois Aleinu, said Reb Chaim Vital. Why? Because that's when you get the third bechina of your neshama yisera. You get the part in the mikvah, then you get it ready by Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbos, and then you get the final chelik of your neshama yisera when you say Ufrois Aleinu Sukash Leimecha. Then nothing can hurt you. Then no goyim can hurt you or touch you. And everyone knows that if you made mistake, you said Shomer Amo Yisrael Lo Ad, you have Toich Kedei Diber to fix it. Interesting over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, how long is Toich Kedei Diber? He says, Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umoiri. Usually, you don't get that amount of time. Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umoiri. Usually get Shalom Alecha Rebbe. Ayin in the Shoina Lachas Rechaim Kanievsky, who asked that kasha. The minig of Shamru. No, what should I tell you, Rabbi Yisai? The minig of a shamru, I guess everybody should do like the minig, but the one thing don't do is don't do against the minig. If you're in a place that they say v'shamru, so then you should say v'shamru. If you're in a place that doesn't say v'shamru, so then mistami you shouldn't say v'shamru. Hagam, that it's brought in the Ma'aser Rav, that the Vilna Gaon himself did not say v'shamru. In his shul, they did say v'shamru, and he brings down, in his own shul, they would say it. Atzibur Etzloi did say it, and the Shatz did say it, but the Gaon didn't say it. I guess when you're as big as the Gaon, so then you're your own world, you're your own minig. But a regular person, if he's in a place that says v'shamru, he should say v'shamru. If he's in a place that doesn't say v'shamru, then l'chayra, he shouldn't say v'shamru, and not to be different than the minig. So that is the two chalakim, the two sifim of the simon, which are not negay us. And today we're going to talk about sif beis. And sif beis over here, Rabbi Yisai, let me give you a bit of a background, and we're going to get now. I'm going to break it up. There's about 20 to 21 or 22 issues that we have to discuss here of making an early Shabbos, Berech. And just to give you an idea, I would say about the first 6, 7 issues are going to be the issues klape, the davening early. Those are one set of issues, one set of reasons why a person might want to refrain from making an early Shabbos. And then there's a second group of issues, the last like 10, 11 issues, which are the issues of the Suda, making the eating part, make eating early and Kiddush early and all that. So we're going to break it up. Again, everybody after it, you should ask the Rabbanim and your Paiskim and your Minhagim. I'm just telling you the 22 issues that everyone agrees are an issue in making an early Shabbos, and we'll try as we go along to give Yeshuvim to the issues and Limudei Chusim to the issues. The first issue is Ma'ariv. I see here it says that they're having trouble hearing. Is it everybody, or if it is, then I could change my microphone?
I hear.
I can't hear anyone, so somebody could just chat.
Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Everybody, if it's everybody.
Can the Rav hear me?
Good.
Do you hear me?
Fine.
I hear, but it is a little bit of a tinny.
Don't hear well. Some don't hear well. Okay, so 1 minute. Let me just change my audio. Is good. So there's differences. Some people good. Okay, it's good. Okay, so then I'm going to go weiter.
Slice is going to do. Okay.
So it's like this, Rabbi Yisai. So it's like this. Issue number 1 of these 20-something issues. In the end, I need somebody to keep count and let me know how many there are. I couldn't figure it out because I have some double issues. You'll tell me if there's 20 or 22. Issue number 1, Ma'ariv. HaRav, we know in the regular season, in the regular year, there's always a big machlekes. When are you allowed to daven Ma'ariv? There's machlekes in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanon. Issue number 1. What's the issue? Are you allowed to daven Ma'ariv from plag? Machlekes. Some shittas hold that plag is already night. The Rabbanon hold that no, only from shkia or from tzeis is already night. What's the psak haloch on this shaila? The Gemara says Ovid Kamar Ovid, Ovid Kamar Ovid, like a cold olam Gemara. You choose, and that's what you do. You choose, and that's what you do. If you choose, which I think the meaning of most people, last year during Corona, a lot of people take a daven Ma'ariv by plag, but most people, certainly in Eretz Yisrael, certainly where I come from growing up, most people daven Ma'ariv after night, after Shkia Kapanim, after Nacht, or whatever. That's what most people did. That means that most people are taking on the Anhaga of Rabbanon, that they daven Ma'ariv by Nacht. That's the Anhaga of most people. Memela, we know, says the Mishnah Berurah, that whatever you do, you have to do it for your whole life. Yeah, well, at least, until you decide to change forever. But you can't have to have one anhaga. You can't do one night this and one night that. You can't do that. Otherwise, it's a problem of Atarti Desasri. If you daven Ma'ariv, like I think most of us, I shouldn't say most of us, but I know the people that I know, most of the people I know are davening Ma'ariv after Nacht. So then that means you have to have that anhaga and you have to continue that anhaga, which brings us to issue number one. Comes along the Ritz Gaius, which is brought in the Torah and Rach Study Gimel Sif Gimel. And he says, well, this is the first reason why you cannot make what we call the early Shabbos. Says the Ritz Gaius, how are you going to make an early Shabbos? If you're noyig like the Rabbanan Kol HaShala the whole year, so then says the Ritz Gaius, Nagu Kol Yisrael Rabbanan Ein Mispalim Arvis Elam Shechashecha. So therefore, issue number one is Friday night. You're not allowed to daven Ma'ariv after Plag. You have to daven Ma'ariv the same way you davened on Thursday night and Tuesday night and Sunday night. You're davening Ma'ariv after Nacht. So then you can't, what we call the early Shabbos, when they're making the Ma'ariv, issue number one, says the Ritz Gaius brought in the Torah and the Mogen Avram, is that you're not allowed to daven Ma'ariv because you have already chosen like the sheet of the Rabbanon. That's issue number one. How do we get out of that issue? So first of all, the Rambam says not like that. The Rambam says in Perek Gimel Zayin, Yesh Lispalel Tfilas Ma'ariv Shalei Shabbos V'Av Shabbos Koidim Shkiya. The Rambam says you're allowed to. Again, spell Ma'ariv of Motzei Shabbos, that will be a different time. But the Ma'ariv, he says the Rambam sheet is you're allowed to. The Rosh's sheet is that you're allowed to. What's the pshat? What happened to Tarti Desasri? How come on Tuesday night I can't just pick up and decide that I'd like to daven Ma'ariv from Plag if normally I daven from after Nacht? So there's three answers to this question. Each one of them more geschmack than the other. They're brought in the Mogen Avram, in Sif Aleph, in our Siman. The Mishnah Berurah brings one of them in Sif Katan Gimel. Three terutzim. What's the reason why? The first teretz is, it says the Mogen Avram, and the Mishnah Berurah brings this, because you know why you're allowed to daven Ma'ariv Midbar Diyayim? Because there's a mitzvah to be moisif on the Shabbos, and berega you were moisif on the Shabbos, you turned it into night. Oh, so if you turn into night, so on a regular day, I can't turn Tuesday into Wednesday. I can't turn Wednesday into Thursday. But tonight, you could turn Friday into Shabbos. So therefore, you're right. On a regular night, you have to wait till the night. That's if you chose that, and you always daven Ma'ariv by Nacht. So now you can't come along and decide I want to daven Ma'ariv on Tuesday night before it's Tuesday night. You can't daven by Plag. But Masha'enkin on Friday, you're allowed to daven after Plag, because if you accept Shabbos, so then now that becomes Shabbos. That's reason number one. The Mogen Avram brings two other reasons. The Mogen Avram says, what's Ma'ariv Keneged? Ma'ariv is Keneged, the korban of the Evarim and the Pedarim. They used to burn the leftover parts of the korban. When did they do that? At night. In fact, the Mogen Avram, when did they do that on Shabbos? They can't do it on Shabbos. You're not allowed to burn the Evarim and the Pedarim on Shabbos of the Friday Karbanis. So when did they burn those Karbanis? They did it after Plag. Givaldik. So the Ma'ariv is Keneged. Our Ma'ariv is Keneged, the burning of the Evarim and the Pedarim. Says the Mogen Avram, and Mela, you could daven Ma'ariv even though on a regular night you're not allowed to daven before Nacht. But tonight, you could, because that's Keneged the Ma'ariv. So you can go and daven Keneged the Ma'ariv dafka after Plag. HaRav, you have to ask, according to the rest of the world, what's the pshat? How they davening Ma'ariv at night? If Ma'ariv is Keneged the Evarim Pedarim, I'll leave you with that interesting shaila. A third ma'aluch of says the Mogen Avram is, you know what? There is a sheet in the Rishonim that says you could choose one night like this and one night like that. Okay, so we don't paskin like that, but it is a tzirif. So halacha lemaisa on the first shaila, the mechaber in Shulchan Aruch, Reish Samech Zayin, Siv Beis, paskins that shaila. You're allowed to daven Ma'ariv early. Dainu from before Shkia, from after Plag, Hagam on a regular night that you do not. That's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. But you must know, Rabbi Isai, for the Mekubalim amongst us, the Arizal paskins not like this. The Arizal paskins al pikabala like the Ritz Gaius. And that the halacha is that you can't daven Ma'ariv until it's night. And this would be reason number one why a person would maybe want to refrain from making an early Shabbos. The Negoyin in the HaRav, he brings down Ma'ariv on Shabbos, you should daven by night. And he says, Ad kedei kach, even to daven b'yechidus. The Goyin would daven b'yechidus. If he wouldn't get a minyan by night, he would wait to do a daven by night, b'yechidus. Goyin Rav Moshe, our Rebbe in Chelik Beis and Siman Samech, he says, it's true that the Bir Halacha does bring this, but you should know, he says, that it's neged most rishonim, and he says you can't do like this gra unless you are noyig like the goyin in all things. But I will end this first problem, we'll call it, this first issue, with the words of the Bi'alacha. The Bi'alacha says, this is in Reisha in Aleph, Sif Aleph, Dibra Maschel Miyad. The Bi'alacha says this is reason number one. Issue number one, says the Bi'alacha, is why you shouldn't make an early Shabbos, is because if you daven Ma'ariv always after Nacht, so then you have to keep your Anhaga and you got to daven after Nacht. That's issue number one. Issue number one. Now, by saying, the Mishnah Berurah, it's interesting. The Mishnah Berurah, we know over here, the next problem, we'll call it, this is one of the famous problems of making an early Shabbos. This is brought in the Mishnah Berurah and Sivkot and Gimel. This is the problem of the Tarti Desasri, the real Tarti Desasri, I'll call it. The fellow comes to make an early Shabbos. So he makes Mincha after Plag, and he makes Ma'ariv before Shkia, also after Plag. This is probably the most famous problem that people know about making an early Shabbos, is the real Tarti Desasri. What is it, Rabbi Isai? If you're davening Mincha after Plag, which is how most, I shouldn't say most, how many early Shabbos minyanim are, is that they daven Mincha after Plag. So then you're establishing that it's still Friday, because you davened Mincha then. So then how are you going to daven Ma'ariv after Plag before Shkia? So that it's Friday. How are you doing that? That's a real Tarti Desasri. Even if we said you could daven Ma'ariv after Plag, that's only if you establish that it is Shabbos by not davening Mincha this time. This is problem number two. I must tell you, it's a very easy thing to fix. All you have to do is make the Mincha finish right before Plag and start your Kabbalah Shabbos right after Plag, and then you fixed it, which a lot of shuls do. And Mistama, that's what somebody should do. How do I know Mistama somebody should do that? Because the Mishnah Berurah says that even though there's a kula from the Derech Chaim, which I'll tell you about in a moment, but even though there is a kula to do this from the Derech Chaim, he says, don't be soymich on this kula, because it is a Tarti Desasri, and this is the second issue of making an early Shabbos. However, I must tell you, as I go along, I'll be matzdik the Minei Klal Yisrael, as Hashem. The first thing we have, you don't need a tzedakah for the Minei Klal Yisrael. That's pashut that we paskin that you're allowed to daven Ma'ariv before Shkia. That's on a Friday night, on a Leil Shabbos. The second thing is a much more difficult one, because the Mishnah Berurah says, Ein lismach hazeh. But what is he saying not to be seimach on? He's saying, don't be seimach on the Derech Chaim. L'maiseh Abaisai, the Derech Chaim, the Helik and Asivis, in Dinei Ma'ariv of Siman Samach Vav, he brings down over there that l'maiseh, once a person davens mincha, you would have thought that that's considered Friday, but now that he's Makabel Shabbos, he has the ability to turn even part of this twilight zone, this Plag zone, into Shabbos. Because berega that you accepted Shabbos, you turned this part of the Plag into Shabbos. That's a big chiddush, but he said that's why it's not a Tarti Desasri. He says, Einachanami on a regular night of the week, no, maybe it's a Tarti Desasri. On a Tuesday night, it's much worse. If it's Tuesday or it's Wednesday, Tuesday, it can't be Tuesday and Wednesday. You can't daven Mincha and Ma'ariv. That's a very much bigger problem. But on Friday night, it's a little bit better, because on Friday night, I davened Mincha, it was Friday, yes, and then I was Makabel Shabbos, and now Yidei my Kabbalah, I turned it into Shabbos. The Derech Chaim himself, though, says you could be seimich on this mitam tircha laostvam ulekabsim pamayim, because it's difficult to connect, to collect together. It's a little bit difficult to collect the minyan together. I don't know. On this one, Rabbi Isai, I don't know. Let's say a person tells me it's either this, all I have is the early minyan. All I have is the early minyan, and they're not doing it, let's say, the correct way, the way the Mishnah Berurah says, and they're doing it Tarti Desasri. So he tells me, should I daven bechidus mincha before Plag, and then I'll daven with that Ma'ariv after Plag? I don't know, Rabbi Isai, to tell you to daven bechidus, I don't know, especially Erev Shabbos, I don't know, and when there's a Derech Chaim, and the Mishnah Berurah says maybe in Lismai Chazeh, but the Mishnah Berurah just meant not to do it. The Mishnah Berurah says, B'shasat Chak, I don't know. The Maisa, if you would have asked me, I would have said that if you have no choice and this is your matziv, then Nevada, you do like the Derech Chaim, because that was the Minig Yisrael. And if it means not getting a minyan, then you're going to go and daven mincha b'yechidus. I don't know. This was the Minig Yisrael, and that's what I was going to say today. I felt nervous saying it to go not against the Mishnah Berurah, but the Mishnah Berurah says, "Ain't this much?" And then I saw Baruch Hashem that the Koibetz Halachas, that's from Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky's eingesund, and in Shabbos Chelik Aleph and Perek Ches and Sif Gimel, at the end of the Ar Gimel, he writes mamish like that. He says, Avadi, you have to try to avoid the situation. Says you have to avoid the situation. But look, the Aruch HaShulchan brings the Derech Chaim. You know, if the Aruch HaShulchan brings the Derech Chaim, and you shouldn't maybe get into this shaila, but it's a vada odd if he writes to daven with the minyan in the Tarti de Sasri, then to daven beyechidus. And that's my psak also. Yehuda v'oid lakra, but that would be also my psak. Okay, another issue, Rabbi Isai, with the early Shabbos. This is a very interesting issue, Rabbi Isai. It's a very interesting issue. What happens if Rosh Chodesh is on a Friday? Okay, let's try and figure this out. He's davening, and actually there's two ways you can have this case. Okay, let's hold off on that case because I'll get to it in a moment. Another problem is Sfiras HaOmer, Rabbi Isai. If you look at the end of Sfiras HaOmer, how many people have forgotten if you look how many people on an early Shabbos, on Sfiras HaOmer, at the end of Sfiras HaOmer, how many people, take a survey, how many people are not able to count at the end of Sfiras HaOmer the bracha? If you go over to them, many of the people that are not counting Sfiras HaOmer with the bracha is because they made early Shabbos. I know people that have a minig that during Sfira, they don't make an early Shabbos because they know that they're going to wind up forgetting. Because Sfira, everybody agrees you got to count Sfira at night. And Sfiras HaOmer is one of those things that if you're not with a minyan, you forget. So therefore, that's another reason, but that's a technical reason. And I'll say it anyways. A yahrzeit is another shaila, which in Mitzvah Shem, I want to get through the davening issues first. Yahrzeit is another shaila. What happens if a person has a yahrzeit in Shabbos? There's a Chelkas Yankiv, which we can't talk about now in Chele Gimel and Sidon Kuf Mem Tes and Yeredeis and Yeresh Lamed Daled. He discusses this shaila that if he's going to daven Ma'ariv early, is he davening on the yahrzeit? And that's a very also interesting shaila. But let's go weiter. The next big issue in making an early Shabbos is, are you allowed to daven Ma'ariv before Plag? The answer is, of course, not. You're not allowed to be Makabel Shabbos before Plag. You're not allowed to daven Ma'ariv before Plag. It's obviously the only question we're discussing is once it hits Plag. But l'chayra, there's a big problem here. L'chayra, most of us that are making early Shabbos are maybe davening Ma'ariv before Plag. What? How could it be I'm davening before Plag? I'm not davening before Plag. The Ma'ariv is not before Plag, but the Rabbi side, there's a big machlekes. What time is Plag? There's a tremendous fight between the Mogen Avram and the Levush. Is Plag an hour and a quarter? Shoy Zmanius, but we'll call it an hour and a quarter. Is it an hour and a quarter before Tseis, when you cheshbon out the day from Alois to Tseis, and it's an hour and a quarter before Tseis? Or is it an hour and a quarter before Shkia? Rabbi side, this is a world war. This is mamish a world war, and there's a mishabur about this in Reish Lamed Gimel. He brings both shitas. There's a mechaber about this. Now we know the halacha is you cannot be makabel Shabbos bevadai before Plag. That's no shaila, and you can't daven Ma'ariv before Plag. And the mishabur in Reish Lamed Gimel Sivkat and Yud, he brings down this yesh deis b'poiskim emasu Plag mincha. Alkein yesh lismaich lahakel shalolach serv l'spalo. Mishabura says Reish Samech Aleph Sivkat and Kaf Hey. He says linyanenu b'diavad. The Mishabura seems to worry about both plags. Do you know what that means in a practical sense, everybody say? That means if you hold Rabbeinu Tam, let's say Tseis, what we spoke about last time, then when is Plag? If you're going with the Mogen Avram, an hour and a quarter before 72. So what that means, Rabbi say, you know what Plag is? 75 minutes before 72 minutes. You know what that is? Whoever's bad in math doesn't know. You know what the answer is? 3 minutes before Shkia. So if Shkia, let's say in Yerushalayim, Shkia is close to 7:40 or something like that, that means Lafidis Cheshbin, it'll come out. You certainly can't daven Ma'ariv until 7:35. You know, you can't daven Ma'ariv until 7:36 or something like that. This would be another reason maybe to refrain from making an early Shabbos. But you should know, Rabbi Isai, that obviously something is fishy here. Because Rabbi Isai, then how do any of us madlik neiris 18 minutes before Shkia? And in Yerushalayim, they're accepting Shabbos 40 minutes before Shkia. So you can't be Makabel Shabbos before Plag. So no matter what, there's a problem. No matter what, there's a problem, Rabbi Isai. Because no matter what, if you're going to cheshbon out Plag from Tseis and an hour and a quarter before that, so then no matter what, you're probably being Makabel Shabbos too early. So this is something which it's a very geschmacka topic. I can't be myrich on it now, but it's a very geschmacka topic. There's a Ramah that is brought in Reish Samach Aleph, Sif Aleph, with the actually also based as a Bir Alocha and Reish Samach Gimel, Sif Dalid, and he says there used to be on Haga, the Ramah says that they would makabel Shabbos 2 hours early. Now the Bir Alocha is very bothered by this. He says, what do you mean? How could you be makabel Shabbos 2 hours early? If you're makabel Shabbos, you can't be makabel Shabbos in the middle of Friday afternoon and Friday morning, and you can't do such a thing. So the Bir Alocha makes over here a ganze cheshbon, which I'll explain bekitzer. But the way it works, basically, Rabbi, and I'll give you like a case study. Let's say Shkia is 7:48. Those are the numbers I have on the paper here. Let's say Shkia is 7:48. And let's say that Alois was 4:06, something like that, 4:06. And Seis, listen to this. Again, Alois is 4:06. And Seis, depending if 72 or 90 minutes, is about 9 o'clock. That means it goes from 4 in the morning until about 9 o'clock, which makes Be'erech, the Shoyz Manius, about an hour and 25 minutes. So watch this, Rabbi Isai. So what's Plag? Now watch this. Plag, this is Gevaldik. Plag, according to this cheshbon, is 7:15. If you do the Alois, Tarbenatam, Plag is 7:15. Now that's going to be a big problem. So comes along the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, yeah, but there was this minig of the Ramah that they would accept Shabbos 2 hours before Seis. What 2 hours? Shoyz Manius. So what's 2 Shoyz Manius? That would be, according to our cheshbon, an hour and 25 minutes. That would be basically about 2 hours and 50 minutes. So it comes out very geschmack. It comes out, if you're soymich on this Ramah, you would be able to be makabel. What time did we say Seis was? We said it was around 9-ish, right? So then what time would be, according to that, 2 hours, 2 shoyz manis before? About 6:10, something like that, around 6 o'clock, 6:10, something like that. As Mela, that would be good. And this you see is anyways the Minig Yisrael. So to add this, even though I saw one sefer, he puts this as one of the problems of making an early Shabbos. But that's a very big chiddush, because if you're going to say that this is one of the problems of making an early Shabbos, Rabbi say, so then you're anyways not going to be able to light candles, and that for sure is the Minig Yisrael. What other issues are there in davening before we go to the food issues? Everybody say is Kriya Shema, and by Rav Yashiv Zeichat Tzadik Levracha, this was the ikar problem of making an early Shabbos. What's the problem with the Kriya Shema? The problem is the Birchas Kriya Shema. Even if I could tell you that you could daven the Ma'ariv early because there's no Tarti Disaster, or I could tell you could daven Ma'ariv early because you could choose one day on a Shabbos because you're a Moisef, so therefore you could daven from Plag Ma'ariv. But what about Kriya Shema? What about Kriya Shema? So you'll say, fine, so I'll say Kriya Shema later. Because we know Kriya Shema for sure has to be b'shach b'chad night. Very nice. But Kriya Shema needs its brachas. As I bezai, this is a big problem. I want to have my Kriya Shema surrounded by brachas. Ad kidei kach goyin Rav Moshe, the Rebbe in Chelik Beisin and Samech, sounds like he says la halacha. It's hard Rav Moshe to read, but it sounds like Rav Moshe saying, yeah, you know what? Daven the Ma'ariv now, and then say the Kriya Shema with the Birchas Kriya Shema later on, because you want the Kriya Shema to be together with the brachas, and Smichas Gula L'Tfila is not ma'akiv. So therefore, Moshe sounds like you should daven taka the Kriya Shema with the brachas later on. Now that's not the Minig Yisrael. That is definitely not the Minig Yisrael, but that's another reason probably to maybe refrain from making an early Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah in Reish Lamed Hey and Siv Katan Yud Beis, he has another problem. He says, aren't you afraid you're going to forget to say Kriya Shema? So can I be saimich on the Kriya Shema Lamita? He says, I don't know. It's a big, long Mishnah Berurah. He says, I don't know. In Kedailas Saimich on the Kriya Shema Lamita. He says, first of all, many people don't say all 3 parshiyos. Second of all, who has kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah deraisa at that point? So this is another reason not to say Kriya. This is another reason not to make an early Shabbos, because inevitably the Kriya Shema is going to have to be later. The Mela, what are you going to do? You're going to have the brachas before and the Kriya Shema later, and void. You might forget. Elamai will be saying on the Kriya Shema Valamita, but the Kriya Shema Valamita, you didn't have kavana, and you're not saying 3 parshas. Not so great. Another problem is that you're not allowed to start a Suda Rabbi Isai 30 minutes before. You're not allowed to start a Suda 30 minutes before Kriya Shema, because we're afraid you're going to forget to say Kriya Shema. Now, Rabbi Isai, most of the early Shabbos minyanim, what time are they coming home? They're coming home 30 minutes, for sure they're coming home, sometimes around that time, it's like 29, 28, 27, until you sit down, 25 minutes before the Zman of Kriya Shema, that can happen sometimes. Are you allowed to start a meal if you're within 30 minutes of the Zman Kriya Shema? So the Magen Avram says no. He says you're not allowed to. Now there's an El Yerabba that says you are allowed to. He says you are. I'm not going to go into why now. And the Mishabura and Sivkot involved Paskins. You can't put up signs against this person in Meir Sharim because he has what the Saimach on. But this is another reason, Rabbi Isai, why a person should probably want to maybe perhaps refrain from making an early Shabbos because he's going to inevitably get into this issue. Now, the question is, what's 30 minutes before this Zman Kriya Shema? Is it 30 minutes before Shkia? Probably not, because you shouldn't really say Kriya Shema at Shkia. It's 30 minutes before the earliest time you say Kriya Shema. In Yerushalayim, some people say Kriya Shema already 20 minutes after Shkia. Elamai, I'm being told over here, why can't you just make a shomer? Who exactly is going to be the shomer? Everyone's eating. Says the Mishabura, they're all involved also in the same problem. So Kamo that you'll forget, so they'll forget. So this Rabbi Isai, the 7-8 issues, Rabbi Isai, of an early Shabbos in regard to the tefillas, in the problems of the tefillas. Maybe at the end we'll make a sikkum, but this is the issues regarding the tefillas, the davening. 7-8 issues. Now we start the eating, Rabbi Isai. Now we start to eat. What are the issues in the eating? So the first issue of an early Shabbos is the Shiltei Giborim. The Shiltei Giborim himself in Daf Chaf Aleph and Beis Ois Beis, he brings down, you're not allowed to make Kiddush until Knisasai. So according to the Shiltei Giborim, there's no early Shabbos. According to the Shiltei Giborim, how could you make an early Shabbos? You're only allowed to daven make Kiddush when it's already Nacht. It says Zachar Zachrei Wala Yayim B'Knisasai Zachar as Yom Shabbos. You have to wait till Nacht. This Rabbi Isai is neged Shulchan Aruch, and it's certainly neged the whole anhaga of early Shabbos. But I have to mention it. I wouldn't be remiss if I did not mention it. But that's issue number one. Issue number two is: can you make kiddush during plag? What do I mean? What's the shaila here? Comes the game of Moshe Sternbach in Chelakei in Simenayin Gimel, and he has old tshuva about this. He says, wait a minute. Even though we were makel to have Ma'ariv after plag, and we were not concerned with the Tarti de Sasri, but he wants to say that that's all because tefillah is the Rabbanon. So on the Rabbanon, you could falazich and be soimich. But he says, but the pasuk zachas Yom Shabbos l'kadsho is a mitzvah deraisa. He says, how could you say that you're going to get the mitzvah deraisa on a time that by you is usually not night? So he is very concerned with this. He says, if you're going to make Kiddush early, make sure at night you say again, Zachar Yom Shabbos l'kadsho, and have kavanah to be yotzei Kiddush deraisa. Where's the kais? Okay, Kiddush ala kais is only the Rabbanon, and that you'll be soimich on the Kiddush ala kais that you made before Shkia. But I tell you, Rabbi Isai, that this is another reason. Another problem. Rabbi Isai, what are you going to do if there's a bar mitzvah boy and his bar mitzvah is on an early Shabbos? It falls out on Friday night, on Shabbos. So this is very schwer. This child's first mitzvahs, and we'll see it's a big shaila. He might not be getting Kiddush deraisa. He's not going to make Kiddush again, right? And his first mitzvahs. And we're going to see soon about the Suda itself. He's only maybe being yaitze to the Rabbanon, and this is also not so gevaldik. What about the Suda itself? So this already, the Taz and Reish Sadi Aleph Sivkot and Vav. The Taz says, Suda's Shabbos, yeah, if it's early Shabbos, it's called Shabbos, and you can have the bread, and your yaitze Suda's Shabbos, and this is brought in the Aruch HaShulchan and Sivkot and Hay. However, the Maral in the Gvuras Hashem, in the 48th parak, and the Rebbe, the Derech Chaim, the same Derech Chaim, which is what we're all based upon, that we are having an early Shabbos, the Derech Chaim says you must make sure to have a kezayis of bread at night, because we paskin hayoim. That means there are 3 times it says hayoim, and each one of them is a separate meal, and it has to be in the Yom HaShabbos. So therefore, the Derech Chaim, who we are relying on for the whole entire early Shabbos, the Derech Chaim says that you have to have challah at night, a kezayis, maybe not a kabeya, a derech agav. I once asked Scheinberg Zechron Avracha, why not have a kabeya at night? Why does the Mishnah Berurah, when he brings down, it's toiv lochish for this shita? It's important to be chayshish for this shita. Why does he say, and therefore you should try to have a kezayis at night? Why doesn't he say you should try to have a kabeya at night? So Steinberg said, because since you're in the middle of a Suda already, so then even the Kazayis has a Chashivas. I think also Rosh Shlomo Zalman says a similar thing. Ayin Sham in the Shmir Shabbos in the Nun Dalid in the 54th Perek in Ha'ara 138. He says once you're eating a Kazayis in the middle of the Suda, it's enough. But that's another reason why a person not has to refrain from the early Shabbos, but he has to be aware that he's not getting necessarily the Suda's Shabbos. You're not getting soon, and I'm being asked there, then why not even less than the Kazayas? Because less than the Kazayas doesn't have a shame of an Achila. Say Bazay, if it doesn't have a shame of Achila, we're not going to say it on less than the Kazayas. There's another issue, Rabbi Isai, with the early Shabbos. And this one, Rabbi Isai, is such a big issue. Rabbi Isai and Vazvet Zayin with the Meya Brachis. What's going to be with the Meya Brachis? Rabbi Isai, you have to get 100 brachas. On a regular Shabbos, you're already missing around 22 brachas. So you could nash, and you could this, and you could that. But Rabbi Isai, if on an early Shabbos, if you make an early Shabbos, you just lost out on 15 more brachas. You just lost out on the 4 of Kriya Shema, the 7 of Shemona Esrei, the 2 of Kiddush, the Netilas Yadayim, the Moitzi. That's another 7. That's Rabbi said another 15 brachas. How are you going to make up 37 brachas on Shabbos? How much nash could you eat, Rabbi Isai? So what are you going to say? You're going to say, no. Those Meya brachas are for the cheshbon of Shabbos. Oh, that's already Rabbi Isai. That Rosh Shlomo Zalman said not like that. Rav Moshe Sternbuch, I heard from his mouth, said not like that. Rav Elyashiv said not like that. They all held the Beis Din HaGadol. They all hold that if you make an early Shabbos, that's very nice for the Ma'ariv, and maybe the Kiddush, and maybe the Suda. Meya brachas is a mitzias. Every day has to have 100 meyas, 100 brachas in order to have that Hagon on Klal Yisrael. So they learn that you've got a 37 brachas you're going to have to make up if you make an early Shabbos. That's a very, very serious issue, Rabbi Isai.
Even according to the Taz?
Next, Rabbi Isai, I must tell you, the Shevet HaLevi says not like this. The Shevet HaLevi, Hitaka says that the brachas go for the cheshbon of Shabbos. But what should I tell you, Rabbi Isai? The Beis Din HaGadol, Shlomo Zalman, Rav Elyashiv, Rav Moshe Sternbuch, the Beis Din HaGadol does. Ya'alev Yavai, what happens if Rosh Chodesh falls out? What happens if Rosh Chodesh, this is such a big problem. The day Rabbi Isai of Meya Brachas, that's borrowed from the Poskim. It's either from Shki or Tseis. There's a whole shaila. If it's Shki or Tseis, okay, but that's borrowed from the Poskim. It's either from Shki or Tseis. The only question is that maybe on an early Shabbos, someone could have been mechadish that it's from the daytime, that it goes for the Shabbos. But the Rav Elyashiv says not like that. Shlomo Zalman says not like that. Ya'alev Yavai, what are you going to do, Rabbi Isai, if it's Rosh Chodesh? Now, this question you can have both ways. If Rosh Chodesh is Friday, not Shabbos, or Shabbos, not Friday. Now, this becomes a very big problem, Rabbi Isai. If Rosh Chodesh is on Shabbos, you'll say Ya'alev Yavai, even though you started the meal when it wasn't Rosh Chodesh, But Rabbi Isai is a much bigger problem. What happens if Rosh Chodesh is Friday? Oh, you're going to get a headache, Rabbi Isai. If Rosh Chodesh is Friday, so now you daven Ma'ariv already. If you daven Ma'ariv, you obviously didn't say Ya'alev Yavai, because Shabbos is not Rosh Chodesh. Now you're eating your meal. Now, technically, it's still Rosh Chodesh, but you already said Ma'ariv. So you can't say Ya'alev Yavai because that'll be a Tarti Desasri. But this is like a world war, Rabbi Isai. Mishabura Tavchav Dalet, Tzivkat and Beis. This is another reason why maybe not to do an early Shabbos, at least when it falls out to Rosh Chodesh on a Friday, because when Rosh Chodesh falls on a Friday, you know what you're going to lose? You're going to lose the Ya'alev Yavai. Okay, there's other issues. Hefsek Taira. I can't go into that now. But we paskin 100% that the hefsek is allowed to be before Shkia, even if you accepted Shabbos. But there are chumras of the Trumas Hadeshen that you should try to do the hefsek before the early Shabbos, and then another one before Shkia. Okay, that's another issue. Another issue, Rabbi Isai, if you make an early Shabbos, and what's with your wife? She's not in the shul davening. So then we get involved in the Igros Moshe and the Chavis Yoyer, that what's the din if a husband is Mikabel Shabbos early? Is his wife Nigrer, and she's also not allowed to do Malacha, and she's included in his Kabbalah of Shabbos? This you all know, Rabbi Isai, the Igros Moshe Chelik Gimel in Siman Lamed Ches. Goyin Rav Moshe held that it depends why you accepted Shabbos early. If you're accepting Shabbos early just out of convenience, so then that doesn't schlep your wife, and she could still do malacha until later. But if you accepted it as a geder and a takana, you want a kedusha Shabbos, so then it does schlep her. But I tell you, Rabbi Isai, you should know that It's a lot of poskim that say not like this. It's many poskim. Now, most poskim that say, what do you mean? If you're accepting early Shabbos, so then your wife is nigrer. And then don't forget what Rabbi said, there's the Makor Chaim in the Chavos Yair, in the Kitzur Halachos on Sif Yud Zayin, in Reish Samach Gimel, where he says, okay, one thing for sure, your children who are samach on your shulchan, he says, they certainly can't do things for you, because there's a pasuk in the Torah that says, Atu binchu vitecha, that you and your children, your children can't do things for you. He says the Makor Chaim. Listen to his lashon. Even if you want to agree, he says v'ishta is tefillim, and their usher once you were makabel Shabbos. Says the Makor Chaim, if somebody wants to disagree with me, but he'll have to agree with me by his son, the katan, that berega you're makabel Shabbos, you shlepzach also. Your children midin ata ubincha, but there's a shiloh on the wife. A shiloh number one is maybe she has to be makabel Shabbos because of goyrer. Shiloh number two, maybe she has to be makabel Shabbos. She's not allowed to do things for you because of ata ubincha. Now everything she's doing is really for you because she's setting up the food on the blech and she's doing things for Shabbos. This is another reason why, because most ladies are not being makabel Shabbos at the point. I guess you have to tell your wife to get this chumrah that she should be makabel Shabbos, and from the point of when you know that you said the boy b'shalom. Now, boy say. In Eretz Yisrael, like I mentioned before, the minig is by Bnei Agadol. So the Derech Chaim at first wants to say that yes, even he is schlepped with you, but then he says at least you have to agree with me by the one that's Saimach. Now in Eretz Yisrael, the Stipler, Mishlim Zalman, Rebel Yashiv, they all have a chuvas about this. They're not so happy about this. Interesting, Rav Moshe Sternbuch has brought down in one of the journals that is put out here in the Alibah de Hilchos in the 47th volume, in the 18th page, that they asked him about this Hanhaga. So he says, look, the Maisa, B'Maisa Kites, in the summertime, it's very difficult to not do an early Shabbos. And then he brings something unbelievable from the Maisa Rav Chodesh. He brings down that he heard from Rav Leib, that there's the Maisa Rav Chodesh, how Rav Leib Chosid used to say he was a moifis ador. And he said there are two mitzvahs ktanis, two small mitzvahs, and the averas that come out of them are very big. He says one of them is that in Vilna, they're machmir, the spalon ma'ariv bisman b'leil Shabbos. Listen to this. In Vilna, now Vilna, our base is very, very high. So Mamela, Shabbos came out there about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and they would wait to daven ma'ariv because they didn't want to make early Shabbos because the goyim was against early Shabbos. So they would make the ma'ariv late. He says there are two mitzvahs, and it comes out a very big avera. What's the avera? It becomes machlekes each day. It causes tsar b'lechayim libnei beisa. It causes tsaras to the children. It says if you do it, so just make sure to say Zokar Zayim Shabbos L'Kadshay later on. But you see, look, the Moshe Sternbuch himself, he writes, Moshe Sternbuch and Chelik Beis and Simon Tamach Tes, that in my shul they have an early Shabbos minyan, and I don't make a macha. So what's the minyan in Eretz Yisrael? I don't know, but Shlomo Zalman over here, he has a big taina. He says in Dalicha Shleima, in Tefillah, in Perkei Daled, what bothers him the most about the early Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael is he doesn't like that you have some people walking out of shul Shabbosdik, and some people still are driving in their cars. He says, Ein zenachan lahanig, that in the same place, he feels it was a zilzal for Shabbos, that some people are having Shabbos and some people not. That's a new tainer, Shlomo Zalman was mechadish, that you can't have a matziv where there's some part of the community, I guess in a bungalow colony that wouldn't apply. But if you have a situation of where, actually, I shouldn't say that. In a bungalow colony, you can have 2 minyanim, you can have 30 minyanim, what I remember in the Haim. But Al Kapanim, Lamaisa, this is another reason why Rabbi Isai. Now, Rabbi Isai, I said about 18 or 19 problems. It could be, if I give a little bit of an eitzah, half the problems might go away. What's the eitzah? Let's see if this eitzah works. What if I were to make Kiddush first, eat my Suda, and then in the middle of my Suda, I'll go out to Ma'ariv. So we can get rid of all of our davening issues that we had. Now, that might be an eitzah. I'll make Kiddush, I'll eat, and then in the middle, I'll daven Ma'ariv afterward. Okay, I guess you're going to have a shomer. Okay, maybe you'll set an alarm clock or something. So what's the halacha? You're allowed to make Kiddush before you daven. Says the Taz in Sivkot and Dalit Poshit that you don't need to daven Ma'ariv beforehand, and you can daven Ma'ariv after Kiddush. He's talking about the case of Paris Mapu Makadesh. He says it's mutam shabura Sivkot and Yud Aleph. In Reitzel L'Kabel Shabbos Mibar Yom L'Kadesh V'Lechel. If you want to make Kiddush and you want to eat before Nacht, no problem. You can daven Ma'ariv after. Or Chashulchan brings it in Sif Yud Beis. Who's against this anhaga? The Gra. Again, the Goyin is the big loichem against early Shabbos. You're not going to find Groniks, Rabbi Isai, doing early Shabbos. In the Ma'aser Rav in Ois Kuf Yud Zayin, the Goyin said you can't switch the order. You got to eat after Ma'ariv. You got to daven Ma'ariv first. You can't do it. The Tzadua, the Kavachayim brings the Arizal, Tzarech L'Spalel, the Achar Kach L'Kadesh. You have to daven Ma'ariv, then Kiddush, and therefore he doesn't like this Eitzah. Now, Rabbi Isai, if you did this Eitzah, we would get out of a lot of our problems. Because, let's see, my Ma'ariv issues went away, my Kriya Shema issues went away, my Sfiras HaOmer issues went away, my Birchas Kriya Shema issues went away, my Yalav Yavai issues, have they gone away? Yeah. My Yalav Yavai issues have gone away, right? We have, Mamish, yeah. We might have to deal with one way. Most of my issues are going to go away. The Kazayas you're still going to have to have after Nacht. That's still true. And you still won't be able to start the Chatzit Shah before Kriyashma. You'll have to start beforehand, right? But let's see what we have here. Let's try to make somewhat of a sikum here before we add it up. So first of all, what are the issues and problems of an early Shabbos? Let's make a sikum first, and then we'll add it up, and then I'll open the oilam to ask questions. Issue number one is davening Ma'ariv early in general. That was issue number one. Davening Ma'ariv early, if on a regular day, you are summoned. As I go now, I'm going to say what the Mishnah Berurah sheet on these shilas. Davening Ma'ariv, if you usually daven Ma'ariv after Nacht on Friday night, is it different? The Mishnah Berurah says Toiv Limnoya. Issue number one, he says it's better to refrain and not to change your anhaga of Ma'ariv from the rest of the week. Issue number two is the Tarti the Sasri issue, that the Mishnah Berurah says that it's not kedai to be soymech on a Tarti the Sasri. Okay, that issue you can get out of. That issue, the Maisi, you can get out of. The Yalav Yava issue we saw, that could definitely be an issue. If you're going to daven the Ma'ariv, you're going to lose the ability to say Yalav Yava at in order to daven Ma'ariv early, and Rosh Chodesh was Friday, you're going to lose out on the Yalav Yava. Okay, Sfiras HaOmer, a person can come to forget. That's an issue. A yard site, that's certainly an issue. If the yard site is on Shabbos, so then you're davening before Shabbos, and then the other way. Another issue, Rabbi Isai, which this we said can't be such an issue, but davening Ma'ariv from plag when we have the other plag to worry about. So that I told you is a shtickle cheshbon, but if that would be a problem, so then how do you ever light the Shabbos candles after plag, before plag? Okay, so that issue maybe wasn't bother us so much. You have the Birchas Kriya Shema issue that Rav Moshe is very concerned with, and he wants you davening the Birchas Kriya Shema later on after Nacht, which is not the minig. You have the issue of re-saying the Kriya Shema. First of all, don't forget. Second of all, could you be saimich on Kriya Shema Lamita if you don't say 3 prakim, if you don't have kavana? Another issue is not starting your meal 30 minutes before Shkia, for 30 minutes, before this man Kriya Shema. Kiddush, the Shilta Gibarim wants you making Kiddush at night. And even though we don't paskin like this Shilta Gibarim, but that's what he wants. The Kiddush, says Rav Moshe Sternbach, even if I'll be making Kiddush from plag, that's only on the deraisa, on the derabanan of tefillah, or the Kiddush ala kois. But you must remember to say Zachar Zayim Shabbos Kadshai, because maybe I can't rely on Kiddush being a nighttime for the deraisa of Kiddush. If by me on a regular night, it's considered the day before. So therefore, for Kiddush deraisa, Moshe Sternbach doesn't want you to be saimech. The bar mitzvah issue could be an issue. Don't forget they have to have a kezayis pas after Nacht. Don't forget the mea brachas issue. You have 37 brachas you have to worry about now. Okay, so this Rabbi Isai is, in a nutshell, in that Haggis in Eretz Yisrael, it seems to be that Rav Shlomo Zalman has another problem. He doesn't want some people having Shabbos, some people not having Shabbos. That's another issue. If you would make Kiddush before you eat, if you make Kiddush and eat before you daven Ma'ariv, that would take care of many of the tefillah issues, but don't forget, the Goyin doesn't like that, and the Arizal doesn't like that. So that Rabbi Isai, haboicher yivcher. You want to make early Shabbos like is your minig, I'm not telling you not to. I'm just telling you have a lot to talk about this Friday night when you make your early Shabbos. And if you want to get out of the problem, Rabbi Yisai, so then maybe to do the Kiddush first and then the Ma'ariv, but that's a big Kiddush, and the Mishabura does allow it, but the Goyin doesn't allow it. Certainly in places like Gateshead, and certainly in places where Shabbos comes in extremely, extremely late. So then Lamaisa, the Shulti Gibarim is in Pesachim Daf Chav Aleph. Certainly in places like Gateshead, where it's very, very high, and therefore the davening is not going to be until 11 o'clock at night. So you got to do one of these eitzes. You can't start everything. Maybe you'll have the meal first, and then you'll just have the Ma'ariv later, or you just have to make an early Shabbos, and you have to figure it out, because that certainly would be Tzar Bali Chayim, Rabbi said.